Well, a protest on Tuesday night at the University of Mississippi against the re-election of President Barack Obama grew into a crowd of about 400 students shouting racial slurs as rumors of a riot spread on social media. 2 arrests were reported, but university officials say there were no injuries or property damage. The riot comes just after the 50th anniversary of forced integration at Ole Miss with the enrollment of its first black student, James Meredith. I turn to Stephen A. Smith and I ask you, what is your reaction to this?
Well, the first reaction that I'd like to have publicly is I want to make sure that everybody understands that in no way should the University of Mississippi be indicted for the transgressions, the insensitivity, the idiocy, I might add, of a few hundred students. They don't speak for the entire university. It would be inappropriate and irresponsible for me, Skip, or anybody else in America to assume that they replicate and mirror the beliefs, the actions, the thought process of the chancellor, the university as a whole, etc., etc. That's just beyond the pale. Okay. And I'm certainly not going to do that to them. Having said all of that, I think it highlights a significant problem going on in this country, and it's something that simply cannot be ignored. On far, far many occasions, Skip has been accused of racism, so have I.
Okay.
Because we have a segment of our population that is incredibly intolerant of people who think and believe and feel differently than they do. And you can't express a point of view, nor can you provide a perspective without somebody accusing you of X, Y, and Z. It's not fabricated. It's very real. And although it's unfortunate that it happened, I have no problem discussing it, especially in light of the fact that this feeds off of the election. Now, Skip, let me drop something on you. 93% of the black population in this country voted for Barack Obama. In 2008, I submit to you that a lot of folks voted for him because you wanted to make history. He was the first black president, and you couldn't have a black man that close to the presidency and pull that trigger for somebody else. You just couldn't do it. In 2012, I submit to you that, right or wrong, in a lot of parts of the African American community, there was an inherent fear of the other candidate, because of what it was perceived he was, based on politics and the kind of message that was disseminated about him. True or false, we don't know.
I agree with
you. But there's a difference. Mm-hmm. Well, the Latino population, same thing. 70% of them voted for Barack Obama. Why? They would tell you that in large part, although they were not necessarily pleased and they were uncomfortable with the president's, dare I say, lackadaisical approach towards addressing immigration reform, they were very fearful of what Mitt Romney wouldn't do if he was put into that position. Fair or otherwise. This is sports. We're not here to debate politics. But you know me well enough to know that I read and I know this stuff. With that being said, you can't ignore something like this transpiring at Mississippi, because it's one thing to oppose the selection of the president, but for a couple of hundred, and reportedly the numbers escalated to approximately 400 people, feeling free in 2012 to walk around publicly spewing racial epithets and things of that nature. Oh, that's an entirely different ball game altogether, because it's a lot of highly insensitive individuals, and dare I say quite a few organizations that may feel racial hostility. But they ain't rolling up in New York City like that. Yeah, it ain't happening. That's not happening. Let them roll off the Broadway with that nonsense and see what happens. Let them show up in certain parts of L.A. and see what happens. Let them roll up into Chicago and see what happens. Let them roll into a few places. So I'm saying Mississippi, the University of Mississippi, while I understand, appreciate, and am sensitive to you wanting to make it very clear that this is not you, this is just the actions of a few. I'm telling you, to a black person, if you sat there and showed me the story on the front page of the sports section of USA Today, and it said Chicago or New York or one of those cities I mentioned, I'd be shocked. You sit there and say Mississippi, I'd say, oh, okay.
Not surprising.
I'm not that surprised.
It's because if I say Mississippi to you, a black man, what's your first thought?
You think about history.
Yeah.
You think about civil rights, pre-civil rights. You think about some of the things that transpired, segregation. You just think about so many things. And it's totally unfair to a specific institution. I get that. But the flip side to it is that that institution itself is not more important than history and the ramifications and the residual impact, rather, of history. It just isn't.
Well said. So let's frame this. There's a history in this country of college kids getting over-emotional, overreacting to all
Vietnam War,
whatever,
it's everything.
athletic
No question.
wins and losses.
Absolutely, no question.
So we have the actions of guesstimated 200 to 400 students on a campus of 15,346.
Yes, sir.
Should we broad brush
No.
condemn the whole
Not
institution
at all.
for that?
Not at all.
No, we should not.
No, we shouldn't.
Big picture, are there still pockets of racism all over this country? Maybe private pockets of racism, but pockets nonetheless. In the North, in the East, in the West,
Everywhere.
and the South.
Everywhere.
Yes, there are. Trust me, I see it all too often. Racism is still alive and all too well in this country.
Right.
So now we still do have this thing called free speech. So if those kids want to spew their racial epithets because they're upset about the re-election, that's within their right as an American citizen.
Totally.
But they're going to pay for it if they care about their football team on Saturday afternoon. Because even though Ole Miss has tried to work out of its history, the images that have been long-term associated with Ole Miss as far as their Old South heritage goes, as much as they've tried to fight it, all of a sudden, those recent stars that they've had, Patrick Willis, Mike Wallace, I can go on, they've had some, or the Blind Side, all that. The next generation of black kids in the South, you recruit them, they're going to say, I don't know, man. I don't know. I might not feel comfortable there. I wouldn't mind playing football. I get it. I like the coaching staff. I don't like this. Scares me, right? Isn't that going to happen?
That's right.
So they're going to pay for it if, in fact, any of these kids care about the fortunes of their football team. But in fairness now, let's be clear about this. They have worked to remove these symbols. Going back to 1997, they banned the rebel flags at the football game. Okay, that was a nice start.
That's right.
Now they've taken away the mascot of Colonel Reb. Remember him?
That's right.
Now it's the black bear. Not good
When
idea.
did they do that?
What's that?
When did they
Just 2010.
Okay.
They have worked to eliminate part of the fight song, which includes the line, "The South shall rise again." You know, no,
Right.
they did away with. Good for them,
Right.
Because they're trying to join the present, even though there are many people in Mississippi who cherish their Old South past without it being a racist past.
Right.
They're not being racist when they think of that, even though their heritage involves slavery. We got that. That's how a lot of people outside of Mississippi, but they're very proud of who they used to be
Right.
as a region. You get that. But those symbols say to black recruits, ooh, I don't want to be part of that.
And
right?
you also have to remember, Skip, you just talked about the Confederate flag. What year was that removed? Wasn't that 1997? You talked about parts of their song and things of that nature being modified. Didn't you say that was 2010?
Yeah, it's just recent. Yep.
It's 2012.
Okay.
You're talking about stuff that I'm talking about civil rights legislation.
You're saying it's
1954,
too late.
1955.
Yeah, it came.
It's never too late.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, when you're that late to the party,
Yeah.
okay, then it begs the question: what took you so long
to get there?
Didn't you didn't want to come? You know, if I show up to a party that ends at 3, and I show up at 2:45, I really didn't want to be there. You know what I'm saying?
No,
I
you want to make a cool entrance. That's what you
know,
wanted.
but what I'm saying is, I just showed up because
Right.
it appeared to be the right thing to do,
Yep.
but I really don't want to do it, and that's where it comes up. Now, in fairness to white America, you've got a lot of people out there that they lament the fact that any time we talk about racism, we're talking about white folks. And I respect that, because to me, what a lot of people in white America don't realize is that racism connotates a level of power, looking down and seeming superior to somebody else and feeling as if they're inferior. And for the longest time, black folks in America could never make such a, we find that utterly ridiculous.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's pretty hard to argue against that now, when the leader of the free world and the president of the United States happens to be a black man.
And just got reelected.
Right.
Yeah.
So when you have that reality, now all of a sudden it makes sense, and that argument is more plausible, and it's something that the African American community has to pay attention to. But also, while I say that, it's important for white folks in America to recognize that while I am willing to acknowledge that, that still doesn't absolve a segment of this population from what happened historically and the residual impact it has caused, and as a result, the continual need to be ultra sensitive to those kind of things. You have to make sure you guard against that. And when people like these students fail to do so, that means somebody needs to do a better job of pulling them into the modern era.
Well said.